Well, Maurice and Christine, who does he say is to blame for the end of their marriage? Brad put it all out there, including he's lonely.
He sat down for a magazine interview and quietly detonated 3 different headlines at once. Brad Pitt just admitted he is no longer sober after 7 years of sobriety. He revealed a period of his life where the pain became almost unbearable, and he confirmed what tabloids had only speculated about for months. Most of his own children want nothing to do with his last name anymore. This wasn't a scandal that broke because someone leaked it. Brad Pitt chose to say it himself, on the record, in his own words. What he actually said is more unsettling than any rumor. He just admitted the sober years are over. Brad Pitt spent years building a specific public image. The man who got sober. The man who thanked Bradley Cooper from the stage at an awards show, crediting him directly for helping him get there. The man who talked openly about attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for a year and a half, describing the experience as genuinely meaningful. That image just changed. In a new cover interview with Esquire, published this week, Pitt confirmed he is drinking again after 7 years of sobriety. He described the shift carefully, saying he eased back in a restrained way rather than abandoning the sobriety completely. He admitted he got overconfident a couple of times and had to recognize when it wasn't working for him. He said he can have a few glasses of wine now, but not much more, and that he has to stay disciplined about it. The interview itself was notably intimate in tone. Writer Ryan DiAgostino conducted the conversation, and at one point, Pitt reportedly offered him a glass of wine during their sit-down, an odd, almost self-aware gesture given the subject matter they were about to cover. Pitt, now 62, described himself elsewhere in the piece as something of a congenital optimist by nature, framing his outlook as the trait that has carried him through the hardest stretches of his life, even when that same optimism occasionally let him talk himself back into old habits. This is not a man denying a problem. It's the opposite. Pitt walked into one of the most widely read magazine profiles of the year and volunteered information nobody was asking him to confirm. He didn't get caught leaving a bar. He didn't get photographed stumbling out of an event. He sat across from a journalist and said it plainly, on his own terms, which raises an obvious question. Why now? Why would a 62-year-old actor, mid-comeback, mid-press tour, choose this exact moment to hand the tabloids a headline like this one? To understand, we need to zoom in on why he got sober in the first place. And that story is far more complicated than a simple wellness journey. The real reason he stopped drinking in the first place. Most fans know the highlight reel version. Pitt gets sober, thanks Bradley Cooper, moves on with his life. The full picture is heavier than that. Pitt's sobriety journey began in the wake of his separation from Angelina Jolie, a period he has previously described as one of the hardest stretches of his adult life. He told the New York Times back in 2019 that he enrolled in Alcoholics Anonymous for roughly a year and a half in the aftermath of that split. He wasn't quiet about crediting Bradley Cooper either. At the National Board of Review Awards in 2020, accepting his award for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Pitt used his stage time to thank Cooper directly, saying he got sober because of him and that every day since had been happier. It was a strikingly personal thing to say in front of a room full of industry peers, and it stuck. For years afterward, that moment became the shorthand version of his recovery story. There is an interesting symmetry buried in that gratitude, too. Cooper himself has spoken about his own sobriety, dating back to 2004, and has credited actor Will Arnett with being the person who pushed him to change his life at the time. That means the specific chain of support that eventually reached Pitt actually traces back 2 full steps. One actor helping another, who years later helped a third. Recovery, at least in this corner of Hollywood, appears to have passed hand to hand rather than happening in isolation, which makes Pitt's current reversal land as more than just a personal setback. Earlier this year, before this new Esquire piece, Pitt had already opened up further about what those AA meetings actually meant to him during an appearance on Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast. He described the atmosphere in the room as something that genuinely moved him. Men being honest about their mistakes, their struggles, their wants, mixed with real humor. It didn't sound like someone checking a box. It sounded like someone who found something he actually needed. So when Pitt says in this new interview that he's off that path now, even in a limited, controlled way, it isn't a minor lifestyle update. It's a reversal of something he built years of public narrative around. And the reason he gives for needing that structure in the first place is where this story turns from uncomfortable to genuinely difficult to read. The period he says he could barely survive. Buried inside the same interview, Pitt disclosed something far heavier than a drink or two. Discussing a particularly difficult stretch of his life, tied to what he only described as family stuff, Pitt acknowledged experiencing a period of real emotional darkness, one severe enough that he later described it as the one time in his life he came close to a genuinely dangerous place. He was careful with his words. He didn't offer details about what specifically triggered it. He didn't name names. He described the pain during that stretch as overwhelming and said he understood, in that moment, why someone might see no way through it. Different outlets covering the same interview actually captured slightly different framings of this same admission. Some reports quoted him drawing a sharper line, saying he had never truly been in that dark state in the clinical sense, while still acknowledging he had come to understand the pull toward that kind of relief during his darkest stretch. That inconsistency across coverage isn't a contradiction, so much as a reflection of how carefully Pitt was choosing his words in real time, trying to be honest about a genuinely dark period without overstating or dramatizing it for print. He stopped short there. When the interviewer pressed for more specifics, Pitt kept the boundary firm, saying only that it involved family matters, without elaborating further. That restraint matters. This wasn't a man performing vulnerability for a headline. It reads more like someone deciding, in real time, how much of a genuinely painful chapter he was willing to hand over to a stranger with a recorder, and choosing to stop before he crossed a line he wasn't ready to cross. It's worth sitting with why a man who has spent decades practicing control in front of cameras would let even this much slip into print. Pitt is not new to interviews. He has spent 30 years being asked personal questions and giving practiced, guarded answers. Something about where he is right now made him decide that a partial, honest answer mattered more than a polished one. Whatever family stuff means here, it clearly mattered enough to break through decades of careful media training. If a moment that dark traces back to family, the natural next question is which family and which moment? Two answers emerge from the same interview, and neither one is simple. His mother's death and a father he now calls regularly. One piece of that puzzle is grief. Pitt's mother, Jane Pitt, died in August of 2025, just over a year before this interview published. He spoke about her loss as one of several difficult family developments that piled up around the same period, contributing directly to the low point he described. Losing a parent is difficult for anyone. Doing it while every other part of your personal life is also under public scrutiny adds a layer most people never have to navigate. Pitt has talked in past interviews about growing up in Springfield, Missouri, raised in a close-knit, distinctly Midwestern household before he ever set foot in Los Angeles. That upbringing has come up repeatedly across decades of profiles, often as a kind of grounding reference point he returns to when explaining who he was before fame reshaped his life. Losing the parent who represented that entire chapter of his life, while simultaneously navigating estrangement from several of his own children, effectively meant losing both ends of his family story within the same stretch of years, the past and the present unraveling at roughly the same time. What he said next carried its own quiet weight. Pitt mentioned that he now checks in with his father regularly, a small but telling detail from a man not usually known for discussing his family dynamics in interviews. He added, almost in passing, that it's probably better to be the parent who goes first, a blunt, unsentimental way of processing the idea of eventually losing his remaining parent too. It wasn't dressed up. It wasn't softened for the reader. It was just an honest, slightly uncomfortable thought, said out loud. Grief explains part of the picture. It does not explain all of it. Pitt was specific that the low point involved family stuff, plural, not a single event. And anyone who has followed his life over the past decade knows that when Brad Pitt says family stuff, there is almost always a second, much louder story sitting underneath it. That story doesn't involve his parents at all. It involves the 6 children he shares with his ex-wife, and a legal battle that has now stretched on for nearly 10 years without fully resolving. A divorce that still hasn't technically ended. Here's a detail that surprises most people. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie have not been legally married since 2019. But their divorce, technically, still isn't finished. In 2019, a court granted what's called a bifurcated judgment, meaning the two of them became legally single while the underlying case, covering custody, finances, and property, remained unresolved. Nearly a decade after Jolie initially filed, key pieces of their separation are still being fought over in court. The origin of that split traces back to September of 2016. During a private flight the family took from France to the United States, Jolie filed for divorce shortly afterward, citing irreconcilable differences and initially requesting sole custody of all 6 of their children. Years later, in 2022, a heavily redacted FBI report tied to that flight became public, revealing that Jolie had accused Pitt of physically and verbally aggressive behavior toward her and their children during the incident. Pitt was investigated by Los Angeles County's Child Welfare Department in the aftermath. He was cleared, and no criminal charges were ever filed against him. Being cleared legally did not end the story publicly, and it did not end the legal warfare privately either. Long after the custody questions were settled, with a private judge ordering 50-50 custody back in 2021, Pitt and Jolie kept fighting over something else entirely, a French winery the two of them once owned together called Chateau Miraval. The two had purchased the property back in 2008, and it later became the setting for their wedding in 2014, a place that once symbolized the relationship at its happiest. Pitt eventually sued Jolie, accusing her of improperly selling her share of the property to a Russian oligarch, Yuri Shefler, without his consent, turning a former symbol of their marriage into one of its most bitter remaining battlegrounds. That is a lot of unresolved pain to carry quietly for almost a decade. And it turns out his kids have been carrying pieces of it too, in a way that is now impossible to ignore. 4 of his 6 kids want his name gone. This is the detail that turned a personal interview into a full-blown headline. Over the past several years, one by one, 4 of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's 6 children have taken steps to remove Pitt from their own names. It started quietly. In 2022, Zahara publicly used only the name Zahara Marley Jolie, while formally joining her sorority at Spelman College, dropping Pitt without a court filing, just a public introduction. Vivian followed a similar path in 2024, appearing simply as Vivian Jolie in the playbill for a Broadway musical she helped produce alongside her mother. Shiloh went further. On her 18th birthday, she filed an actual legal petition to formally drop Pitt from her name, hiring her own attorney to handle it independently. Her lawyer later addressed the decision publicly, describing it as a significant, independent choice made by a young adult navigating painful events in her life, while pushing back on inaccurate reports about how the filing became public. The court approved her petition, and Shiloh Nouvelle Jolie officially became her legal name. Worth noting here is who hasn't followed that path. Of the 6 children Pitt shares with Jolie, Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, and twins Knox and Vivian, it is specifically Pax and Knox who have not taken any public or legal steps to distance themselves from the Pitt name so far. Whether that reflects a genuinely different relationship with their father, simple timing, given Knox is still younger than his siblings, or personal choices they haven't made public, remains unclear. But the pattern is not universal across all 6 kids. It is concentrated, and that concentration itself says something about how unevenly this fracture has spread through the family. Then came the most recent development, and it's recent enough that most casual fans haven't even caught up to it yet. Just weeks before this Esquire interview published, both Maddox and Zahara filed their own formal court petitions asking to have Pitt legally removed from their names too, citing personal reasons in the paperwork. That means, as of right now, 4 of his 6 children have either legally changed or publicly dropped his last name entirely. Only 2 of his children have not taken that step. Read the timeline of this interview again, with that fact sitting next to it. Pitt sat down to discuss his sobriety and a period of real emotional darkness in the same week his eldest son and one of his daughters were formally asking a court to strip his name from their identities. He didn't address the filings directly in the piece. He didn't need to. The timing did the talking for him. What this interview was actually about. Strip away the individual headlines, the sobriety, the pain, the estranged kids, and a single picture starts to form. This wasn't really an interview about drinking. It was a rare, unguarded look at a 62-year-old man reckoning, almost in real time, with how much of his family has quietly slipped away from him over the past decade, even while the rest of his life looks like a comeback from the outside. Because the outside really does look like a comeback. Pitt spent 2025 back in the spotlight professionally, starring in F1, one of the biggest releases of his career in years, a racing drama that became one of the most talked-about theatrical releases of the summer and put him back in front of audiences at a scale he hadn't seen in years. He's in a relationship with Inés de Ramón, a jewelry industry executive he has been publicly linked to since late 2022, someone described as a steady, positive presence in his life. He's working, he's visible, and by most public measures, he looks like a man who landed on his feet after a brutal decade of legal battles and tabloid scrutiny. But the Esquire interview complicates that surface-level comeback story in a way that feels far more honest than most celebrity press. A man can be professionally thriving and privately unraveling at the exact same time. He can headline a hit movie and still be checking in on an aging father, still grieving a mother he lost a year earlier, still absorbing the fact that most of his own children have chosen to erase his name from theirs. None of those things cancel each other out. They just coexist, uncomfortably, the way real life actually works, instead of the way headlines simplify it. That's ultimately what makes this interview land differently than a typical celebrity confession. Pitt didn't get caught. He didn't apologize for anything specific. He simply described where he actually is right now. Sober, but not entirely. Successful, but not whole. Present for the children who'll still speak to him and quietly absorbing the loss of the ones who won't. It's not a redemption story. It's not a downfall story either. It's just an unusually honest snapshot of a famous man doing what most people eventually have to do, sitting with the parts of his life that never fully healed, in public, whether he wanted to or not. There's something almost counterintuitive in how much control that took. Most celebrities facing this many simultaneous storylines lean on publicists, statements, silence. Pitt instead chose to sit with a journalist and let the contradictions stand uncorrected, unresolved, and largely unexplained, trusting readers to hold the complexity rather than handing them a tidy narrative. That choice alone says something about a man no longer interested in managing his image, only in being honest about what's left of it. Out of everything he chose to reveal in that interview, which detail do you think says the most about where Brad Pitt's family really stands right now? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.